If this bill passes, people will die. I wish deeply that this weren't hyperbole. Trans youth aren't being experimented upon in receiving scientifically backed trans competent care. Those of you who support this bill are the ones experimenting with the lives of young trans people by testing whether or not they can survive the onslaught of horrors through which you are subjecting them.
I can promise you that if a supportive process had been the norm when I was a child instead of this outdated rhetoric, the scars of attempted suicide will not adorn my body to this day. The trauma wouldn't live in my bones that I work to overcome to this day.
Transgender people testifying at a hearing in Arkansas over that state's bills that are the most restrictive in the country and rolling back the rights of that community. The debate was heated and emotional in the state legislature, and this doctor said this is a matter of life and death.
Just after this bill passed the House, these kids heard about it. I've had multiple kids in our emergency room because of an attempted suicide. Just in the last week. Multiple. I've had multiple children. Do you know how many phone calls I've had to field in the last week of children calling me saying, Dr. Hutchinson, if this happens, I'm going to kill myself. Multiple. So I guarantee you, if this bill passes, children will die.
Sadly, their comments did not move the needle with Republicans in the state legislature. They passed measures that prohibit transgender girls from playing sports. Also became the first state in the nation to prohibit surgery and medications that help transgender minors become the gender that they identify with. That last one was a bridge too far for the Republican governor of the state, Asa Hutchinson, and he vetoed it.
If House Bill 1570 becomes law, then we are creating new standards of legislative interference with physicians and parents as they deal with some of the most complex and sensitive matters involving young people. The most recent action of the General Assembly, while well intended, is off course, and I must veto House Bill 1570.
The legislature overrode the governor's veto, and now that has also become the law of the land. I want to bring in our next guest, a woman who voted against the transgender bills, Deborah Ferguson, a Democratic state representative from Arkansas, and she's kind enough to give us some time. It really stuck with me, Representative, that children will die. We heard from that doctor's testimony. You were in the room, that already there's been suicide attempts because of what the legislature did. I'm curious, when the cameras weren't running, did some of these Republicans struggle with their decision, especially when they heard the consequences, or not?
I don't really think so. I know that, Arkansas is a very Republican state. I mean, Trump carried the state by 20-something points. And the far right Republicans tend to be very fundamentally religious. And I think it really comes down to since they have sincerely held religious beliefs that they think there's no such thing as gender dysmorphia. And they think they're protecting children. And it's just been an unfortunate turn of events in the Arkansas legislature. I've always been proud to say until this term that Republicans and Democrats got along in Arkansas and voted for good legislation, and it wasn't like D.C. But now it's all this national politics. These are all national agendas to create dissension and outrage and these culture wars. And unfortunately, we've had 8 different transgender bills filed. And, it's really not about transgender. It's about creating dissension and outrage.
Representative, to me, this was a solution in search of a problem, in that we're talking about a small number of kids here. And the other part is, I think there's this perception among some that this is something somebody wakes up one day and then they do the next day, and it's just, a youthful, rash decision. But this takes place over a long period of time. The parents are all involved. The medical community has many checks and balances before they go down this road. And for anyone to think that this is a decision that doesn't carry difficult consequences societally that come along with it, this is just, I said it and I mean this, a small number of kids that are going through a really tough choice. And who is any state legislature, not just Arkansas, to decide, what's right for them and their family. It just, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either, really. I said this in committee. It's weaponizing religion to discriminate against a very small minority. And I'm Christian, but my religion is about acceptance and love. It's not about discriminating and, doing things that harm people. You're right. I mean, there's no transgender surgery being done on youth in Arkansas. There is some hormonal treatment, and I didn't see the clip, but the doctor from Children's Hospital testified that out of the 47 youth that are on hormonal treatment, 3 have already tried to commit suicide. So yeah, it's unconscionable. I don't know how else to say it, and I'm sorry that it's Arkansas, and I'm sorry that they have chosen to take this path, and not only against these children, but just to make Arkansas look so terrible.
You know, Representative, earlier I played sound from really moving testimony, not just in Arkansas, this being considered in other states as well, parents talking about that struggled themselves with the decision in certain cases, but they looked at their kids and they realized that it was them, not the kids, that didn't know what to do. The kids knew who they were and who they identified as. And universally, they all say that while it was difficult, they have a much happier child as a consequence. It obviously resonated with your governor, who also is a conservative Christian. And I'm curious if he was willing to say, you know, I have a line here. I may not agree with this all, but I have a line. Why didn't it resonate with others? And I say this in the context of, you didn't have to go that many years ago where people were opposed to gay marriage, and then all of a sudden they had somebody in their family or a coworker or a friend who was gay, and they said, wait a minute, if it's Frank or if it's Mary, now all of a sudden I could put a human face on this. You and your colleagues got to see the human face to this, but still, obviously, it didn't change a lot of minds at the end of the day, although it did the governor.
Yeah, Asa Hutchinson, I'm a Democrat, but Asa Hutchinson's been a very moderate business Republican governor. And unfortunately, our legislature has become a very extreme right Trump, Sarah Huckabee governor. And I'm sure she will be our next governor because she will be able to raise the most money. And that's the temperament of the state, unfortunately. He really, Asa's always had great influence with the legislature, and pretty much if he said, I don't want this, it didn't happen, but they don't care what he thinks anymore.
Well, Representative, I do appreciate you making time for us, and hopefully, there'll be some reconsideration of this in Little Rock, but till then. Anyway, Representative Deborah Ferguson, thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to head from Arkansas to New York, and we're going to be speaking about Governor Cuomo with a guy who has worked in politics for decades in New York and knows all the major players. We'll ask, among other things, how many friends does Cuomo really have left? What's it like behind the scenes now in Albany? And will this governor survive? All that and more after this quick commercial break.